After the Second World War, Bloxwich, like many towns across the UK, started to see an expanse in both industry and local house building. New estates started to appear through the growing need to house the growing workforce. Driven by the Industrial Revolution and canal building in the Midlands, the leather, iron and steel industries all played a major role in Bloxwich and Warsaw's development as towns, and equally as places to live.
My name's Susan Wiggins. I was born here. I was born in the maternity home, which is opposite the church. I think it's a home probably for the elderly now, or maybe a hospital, something like that. My family came from here. My parents were born here. Both my grandparents were born here. In fact, I've traced my one family tree back to the 1700s, I think, and all from Bloxwich. I've got lots of memories of Bloxwich, early memories, mainly from my grandparents' house. My grandparents lived in Park Road, which is opposite the park, and my great-grandparents lived in Bell Lane. I was lucky enough to remember them too. I don't know, I remember the trolley buses going past. I remember the high street being a very bustling place. I remember playing in the park all the time. The Bloxwich Wake, as we used to call it then, when there was a procession down the high street. That always used to end in King George's playing fields. That used to be a highlight of our year. Pat Collins Fun Fair, we loved that too as children. I actually remember the Queen once visiting Bloxwich as well. I can remember standing and watching our Queen. So a lot of childhood memories from Bloxwich.
Hi, well, I'm Neil Williams. I've lived in Bloxwich since I was 14. Moved here from Stafford, and I've lived in Bloxwich or around this area ever since. I went to Sneyd School, Vernon Way. It was a really good school. I mean, there were elements of, because obviously it was taking its catchment area from the Mossley, so there were areas of underprivileged kids. There were kids who just didn't want to behave, and there was a fairly rough element. But as a school under Miss Harvey at the time, it was the best school in the area.
My name is Brian Cooper. I'm 84 years old. I've always lived in the Bloxwich area all my life. I was born in a bungalow which is down at just at the end of Field Road, on the end of Field Road and the Litchfield Road. I was born there, and I've always lived down towards, in a place called Maple Street, which is just further on between Blakenall and Bloxwich. Bloxwich was obviously very, very, it was quiet, in as much that there wasn't a great deal going on. Obviously, it was just rows and rows of shops. And over the years, the shops have gradually deteriorated, gone. We've got more nail bars and other things than anything else that's in Bloxwich High Street.
I'm Valerie James. I've lived in Bloxwich most of my life. I love it here. My mum and dad always lived here, so I've lived alongside. I actually lived the same street that I lived in when I was a girl. Started school when I started school at Bloxwich in the infants and on the Dudley Fields. Went back up then and actually finished school at the Church of England school. Yeah, went there till I was 15. Enjoyed it. Went to work a week after I finished school. Worked at the co-op in the flower shop and the grocery shop in Litchfield Street, Walsall. Went there till I had my children. By then I'd got married at 19 and a half because my dad wouldn't let me get married before then. So I got married there, had a lovely wedding at the All Saints Church. Had my reception over at the George, which is now run by Tim, the hardware. It was a lovely wedding, freezing cold in the day, snow at night. Walked down, because them days we were in so many cars, we walked down to Nursery Road in Bloxwich, lived with my mother-in-law and lived there till I had my kids.
And there was a period where you left school but hadn't finished your exams. So I left Sneyd, was at home for probably about a week, and my dad said, it's spending too long in the house. Said, I've got your job. I said, go and see Ken on Monday. He's a works manager. Just go and see him. There's a job for you. And I'm like, well, all my mates are going on holiday and, you know, all of this sort of stuff. No, there's it. Get on with it. So the Monday came and I went to see Ken at Elkington's, who was the works manager. And he said, who are you then? So I'm Neil. My dad sent me for a job. Never told me. So it was literally, I said, well, you know, I'm here, so whatever, what do you want, you know? And he said, we got something in the packing department. So I'd gone from doing my A-levels, fairly intense, you know, study, to working a big cleaning plant and watching a conveyor belt. And then there was a couple of other jobs within that section. One was packing, obviously, shoveling stuff into big crates. And the other one was that made brass and aluminium parts. So they needed to clean those. And if it's brass, you use acid. And if it's aluminium, you use caustic soda, because one's alcohol and one's acid.
Hiya, I'm Linda. I'm 71 years old and I've lived in the Bloxwich area my whole life. I was born in the Pleck and we moved up, our family, to the Mossley estate as it was being built when I was 5. At that time, Mossley was a very small community area where the children could play in the street of football without getting run over. The church was a big thing where everyone went, all the children went to Sunday school, and we all did Palm Sunday. For Easter we used to do a parade.
I don't know what Rycroft is like now, but I bought a flat about 5 doors away from what was the Colpool Tavern, which was famous in the area for being the roughest pub in the borough, by far. It was terrible. But I didn't know this, because I was living in Broad Lane in a fairly decent house, and I didn't know the area very well, and it was close to work. So I decided when I was 21, 22 to start looking for a house. Looked in the local advertiser and there was this flat, and it was on the market for 24,000. And I said to my dad, oh look, here it is, let's go and have a look. So me and him went down to Rycroft and looked at this flat, and I said, well, it'll do. My dad says, make them a daft offer, see how they go. So I offered them 19, which was a daft offer. It wasn't a great place to live. When I started living there, I couldn't understand why people were coming up to the houses with bin liners, and they were opening the boots and they were putting all the stuff in the bin liners and then take it to the house. And it just seemed bizarre. And I remember so I asked one of the old boys who lived downstairs. So I was in it was in Maisonette, so I was in the top half. And I said, why are they doing that? Why are the bin liners? What is it with the bin liners? And he said, well, you don't really know who's looking at you. He said, so if you've bought something, you don't really want them to know what you've bought. So you stick it in a bin liner and you take it to a house. Yeah, so that was brilliant. It's the only place I've ever known where I actually got burgled before I moved in. Obviously being young and whatever, I moved a few bits in and came one day and it was cold. I didn't work out. I went up the stairs. Bedroom window was caved in. All my stuff had gone. And yeah, I hadn't even moved in. There wasn't even that much to nick. but yeah, they still had it away. Yeah, that was a good introduction to the area, really. Yeah.
My name is Vera. I'm 81. I live in Revival Street, Bloxwich. Well, it isn't as clean as it used to be. It looks like a rubbish dump, to be honest. It isn't as nice as when I moved up there in the early 60s.
There were many factories. Elkingtons, who were big copper refiners, covered a large area of Goscott Lane. Summerfields in Clarendon Street, known for the making of all blades used in the leather industry for making holes in saddles and other items. The Bloxwich Lock, famous for making padlocks and keys. Crabtrees for its electrical switchgear, sockets, light switches, etc. Old Hall Tableware, who made the world's first stainless steel tableware, consisting of a teapot, milk jug, sugar bowl and the famous Charles Buffery teapot. The Samuel Wilkes factory made decorative locks and ornamental handles supplied for train locks. Tunnicliffs, known as the silver-trimmed dart makers. All these factories added to Bloxwich and its growing worldwide reputation thanks to many of its workers.
Bloxwich was a very industrial place, really. There was Wiggins who made the... they did make stirrups and things, and then they went on to doing the stainless steel, the Stay Bright it was called, and they've made cake stands, drinking cups and lots of Stay Bright things. I've got a tea strainer at home as well, and jugs and little bowls for milk and sugar and things like that. And there was Webb's was a big factory. A lot of people worked there at the factory there. That was behind our house. Webb's factory was. In fact, my sister worked there when she had to go there when she was 16 because they'd got to go into industry in the for 1939 war. And sometimes we used to pass her a bacon sandwich over the fence until they built proper walls all round it. We couldn't see anything then after the walls were built. But it was the bottom of our garden. My mother wouldn't go in our air raid shelter because the factory was right behind where the air raid shelter was. So we used to just stay in the house when I was small. And but I was only about 5 when the war finished anyway, so I didn't see much of it. Perhaps coming up to 6. But then all our neighbours used to come in our house because one's husband was in the forces in Burma, and the other ones was working for the ARP or something. And they used to either sit under our table or we'd go and sit on the cellar steps, something like that. But we used to have quite a crowd in the house when I was small.
I'm Nigel Wiggin, a member of the Wiggin family that developed Old Hall stainless steel tableware, which became a world famous company. We had agents all over the world and we had 2,000 stockists in the UK. Those of you who don't know about Old Hall, which is disgraceful if you don't, but there might be the odd one or two of you that don't know about it. It's stainless steel tableware, this, which is basically tea sets, but everything else for the table. But the most common popular product were tea sets. Everybody drinks tea. And this is the Connaught teapot, which was our most popular teapot. If you've got an Old Hall teapot, the chances are you might well have a Connaught one. So that would just give you some idea of what we're going to be talking about.
I worked at Old Hall Tableware in Revival Street. I started at Old Hall when I was 15, straight out of school. I started as in the accounts department, and I finished in the accounts department actually. I was there for 17 years. I started as just as a junior, straight from school, just filing and typing and things like that, answering the telephone, and then I ended up managing the sales ledger. I used to deal with all the customers.
The company was situated just off the High Street in Bloxwich, between the High Street and Field Road,
Yeah.
and Old Hall was in that little square in that area. And the reason it's called Old Hall is that there was an old Salvation Army mission hall in that location, built in 1860. We set up business in 1893, 50 yards from the Old Hall, which was in Revival Street. The business was started by my great-grandfather, James Thomas Wiggin, and he set up in a stable at the back of his terraced house in Revival Street, in a room at the back with his eldest son, who was James Enoch Wiggin, and the two of them set up a two-man business, and they were making hardware for the saddlery trade of Walsall. And that was the start of the company. Two people. In the 1960s, we had 520 people. So that's just, but it did start off with just two people. From that, there were four brothers, and they joined father and son, and they were working in the stable at the back. And the result was that this stable got completely full of people with hammers and furnaces, and it was horrendous. And the second brother was my grandfather, William Wiggin, and he told me conditions in this stable were horrendous, noisy, hot, steamy, sticky.
William Wilkes's foundry, I used to walk past there every day on the way to school, and they used to say that the conditions there were so bad that before they went to work they used to have to drink milk to like line all the stomachs and everything because of the fumes that they were working in every day.
So they got me working in this cleaning plant, which was the dipping, the acid dipping. Very little extraction. If there was any extraction, it didn't work. There was a little sort of hut in the area, glass windows, and you worked in there and the air was yellow, and you know, if it got too bad, you open the window kind of thing. Yeah, it was not a great environment. In fact, the bloke that was charge hand in the area only had one lung. Never thought to ask him why that was, but there you go. There's quite a possibility that might have had a contributory cause, yeah.
10 years later, things were getting very, very uncomfortable in the stable, and the Salvation Army Mission Hall, 50 yards away, became available. And it was the size of just a small church hall, but it was ideal for our purposes, 50 yards from where we lived. The Mission Hall was generally known in Bloxwich as the Old Hall. This is the key to it. And it was 1922 when we came up with Old Hall. So the first use of Old Hall was in fact for bathroom fittings. This is the world's first stainless steel teapot. 1930 we actually made that. It was a winner. We'd hit upon a winner, and we developed all the other products, the cake baskets, the condiment sets, more tea sets, and this, which we've looked at before, this is a real middle of the road. This is 1957, the Connaught, and this was our most popular one. But over the years, we made, until we closed down, we made 42 different styles of tea sets. Unfortunately, the Far East was starting to get into the UK with very cheap tea sets. So 1984, June the 30th, 1984, I think the worst day of my life, work-wise. We closed the factory. We'd got 60 employees left from 520 in the 60s. We'd had to lose people. Nobody ever wanted to go, of course, but we had to slim down, and J&J Wigan, Old Hall, finished in 1984. We didn't quite make 100 years. I think it's not, is it 91? And 1893 to 1984. We made 90 years.
Shame, isn't it?
But it was a glorious 90 years. And Bloxwich, it put Bloxwich on the map, especially, you know, in the 50s and 60s and 70s.
There was big changes in the way that the accounts were run because computerisation came in. Before then, everything was manually inputted, but obviously computerisation just changed everything, and it continued to evolve. When we first had the computers, they were huge. They were probably 2 metres square, something like that, and instead of having like a little chip that you put in, you had big motherboards, so you change, which were like A3 size probably. So you would take one board out and put another board in to change what the computer did. They were massive. It's just unbelievable now. And they couldn't do everything. Some things you had to have a separate machine to do some things. I remember a collator. You used to put the punch cards in, and it used to sort all the punch cards out for you. The computer couldn't do that. So computerisation was the big thing for me.
I got a job in Bloxwich again in a leather company called, Arrowsmiths. Small leather company run by 2 sisters and the father who run it. And that company was friendly and okay, but the sisters was quite strict. In fact, you had to do the work, but at lunchtime, our factory looked over to the main road by the bottom end of the gardens, and we used to hang out the window, talk to people, and then some of the youth from the Bloxwich Lock used to come up, and we used to friendly, jeering and everything, but not like the fighting we get today. It was just fun until the boss saw us and said, "Go back to work after lunch." But because the girls were lovely and the supervisor were lovely, it was an enjoyable time there. But unfortunately, because it was a small factory, it didn't pay enough money. So me and my friend, who I'd gone through all school with, she turned up a week later, and so we spent time together there again. And we went to her auntie's factory up Warsaw, which was a leather one. And so that was called John Athrall's, and that was right down by the Butts school, right opposite the school by the Butts. And we went for an interview there and got a job there. And the difference between the wage at Arrowsmith to then, it was shocked. It was a big shock, because the sisters kept us to it wasn't a minimum wage then. You got what you got. And the taxman actually sent me a letter saying, "Where did you work in between?" That's how bad it was.
It had been 2 companies on the same site. So it had been Elkington Refiners, which was a copper refining company, but that had been closed for, I think, 10 or 15 years before I started at the brass stamping side of it, which was the last remnant of the Elkington name. Because Elkingtons had been, as some people might be aware, that the producers of Elkington plate, which was a copper silver plate, and a lot of decorative, high-end decorative ware was made from that. And I was there for about 9 months, and then a guy in the office was due to retire, and they wanted somebody to learn his job, which was customer liaison. So it was liaison between the customers and the factory. And his name was Ken Trigenza, which is the most unusual name. And he'd been a Spitfire pilot back in the war, apparently. He was really old. Well, he was to me anyway. So he'd retired, and I did that job for, I think, about another year or so after that. And then there were redundancies. So they said, well, we don't need anybody in this role because we're moving people over from Cape Hill. So what do you want to do? So your job is going to be made redundant. So, all right. So, but we have got jobs on the shop floor if you're interested. Working machines. So I gave it about 5 minutes of thought and said, I've got no other direction in life at the moment, so yeah, let's just go with that. So I ended up working on the machines, setting drillers, capstans, and all sorts of other things. Because at the time it was very labour intensive. There were rows of women working capstan machines. There were rows of men and women running the drilling sections, and they needed somebody to learn how to set those machines and to keep those machines running. So I started doing that, and that's when I started working shifts, and then they were started to phase in CNC machines, which are effectively the same thing but run by a computer numerical control, and they were the very early CNC machines. So we learned how to set those and how to program those and so on. And so all in all, I was at Elkington's for 10 years in the end, doing various roles. The writing was on the wall when I left in '89, which was the market for stampings was getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And you'd got the Far East imports and you'd got the Italian imports coming in at prices that we couldn't match. So our market was shrinking. And the reason I left was because we went down to 3 days a week and I couldn't afford to work there anymore.
My name's Alan Preston, and I've come along today to talk to you about working life at Crabtree Electrical Industries. But probably I ought to start a bit before working life. I was born almost 80 years ago in Walsall, and I went to a school that was a boys' school called Wolverhampton Road Secondary Modern School for boys. And when I finished my schooling at the age of 15, I was looking around where I should start working for a living, because up until now I've been living with my parents, of course. Everything was provided, so I needed to go out and find a job. So I found a job at Crabtree Electrical Industries as an apprentice, an electrical engineering apprentice, and I did the apprenticeship for 6 years. My favourite part was meeting people, because my schooling was purely boys. It was a boys' school that I went to, so when I started working for a living at the age of 15, I met some girls. You wouldn't believe that, would you? I met some girls, and that was interesting. And the apprenticeship that I did was working all around the company at different departments like the foundry, the plastic moulding shop, the machine shop, the drawing office, all the departments in the company, of which there were many. So in the 6 years that I was at the company, I had a real good grounding for my future life. To the people in Bloxwich, it was a big employer. Crabtree's employed over 2,000 people, and the company started in 1919 in Walsall, manufacturing things like that. A 5-amp lighting switch. And this one here is working as good today as when it was first manufactured, 105 years ago now. So yes, working at the company was good, and not only and you got that type of thing, but the company also went from metal products into moulding products, and they were one of the first companies to manufacture plastic switches called Jasolite. It was a derivative of the Bakelite, and it was called Jasolite after the name of the company, J.A. Crabtree and Company Limited. So it was named Jasolite. The company in Walsall called Lincoln Work. The works opened in 1926 and it closed in 1997. there was at that time over 1,000 people working at the company. It had also branched out into Brown Hills, where there was a company, also in Willenhall, Malvern, South Africa, and in Malaysia. So it was a truly international company. But there was a big impact on people losing their jobs, and a lot of people obviously had to find different types of work because a lot of industries had already gone. Crabtree's was one of the last of the big companies of the West Midlands in manufacturing. So it was difficult for people to find the sort of work that they'd been used to doing, so they had to reassess what they could do in life. And everybody that I knew did find work of some sort or another, but Crabtree's was always remembered as being the family business.
It was a wonderful place to work, wasn't it, Nigel?
It was a family company.
It was a family company.
It was not only the Wiggins. There were at any one time there were 4, 5, 6 Wiggins working for the company, but our employees were based on family groups as well. There were lots of mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters, and they all took a pride because the quality of the product was always our number one consideration.
It definitely
so
was.
the people took a pride in what they did, and it was a lovely atmosphere in the 60s when Sue was
It was.
well and truly
I made
with
lots
us.
of friends there. Lots of friends.
Elkington's was full of families that worked together. You know, there'd be Nan working in the clipping shop, there'd be Grandad working on the presses, there'd be Dad working in the machine shop, there'd be Dad's wife or Mum, whatever, working in other areas. And you'd sometimes have 6 or 7 people from the same family working in there, all together. Yeah, so it was very much very tight families. The area was very community-led. So you go against the community, you go against them for good.
I used to know the different people in the shops. It was just everybody, you know, that you knew. I mean, you'd see somebody out at Tim's and he'd come down the shop and buy off us and we'd buy off him. And you know what I mean? It was like a knock-on thing. There was quite a few different shops that were up here. Not there now, but they used to come to us and we'd go to them, you know. It was really good.
It was impossible to find a job of the same sort of work. It would have to be something completely different. So people reassessed what they could do and found work in other types of areas, mainly in retailing, shops, probably transport and that type of thing. But very few people would have found jobs back in the types of industry that Crabtree's were.